Kicking off the list at number 10, Charlotte of Prussia. This princess was the eldest daughter of Prince Frederick. Back in the late 1800s, her nickname was Sweet Naughty Little Didda. So 1800s, what a weird nickname, so weird. Her grandparents were the talk of a few towns, I would say. One King Wilhelm and one Queen Augusta. They spoiled Charlotte. I mean, sure, she was a literal princess, so we kind of expected that, but she acted spoiled. That was the difference. She didn't want to study while she was in school. After she married her cousin, classic royal history there. After that, she disappeared off to Berlin. She chose the party life instead of the, well, marrying your cousin life. Until her death in 1919 at the age of 59, Princess Charlotte was the center of many scandals. A time before Twitter. Imagine that. They're like, yeah, that's all we know. An entire lifetime of scandals. We're like, ah yes, she was a troubled young lady. We don't know anything. We know nothing. We know so little about history. Also, I'm Team Charlotte. Yeah, go live your life. Enjoy it. Don't marry your cousin. Go party. Go have fun. Number 9. Charlotte of Belgium. Another Charlotte. What's going on here? Are we in the multiverse? How many spoiled princesses named Charlotte are we going to see on this list? I'll never tell. It's 2. It's definitely 2. The daughter of King Leopold of Belgium, again, as you could have guessed, was lined up to marry her cousin. Hey, history, we're learning, look at that, patterns. Archduke Maximilian of Austria, classic mid-1800s stuff, there we go. This was all set in motion, but then in comes Napoleon III. Guy just ruined this entire marriage. The French emperor at the time, this was in the 1860s, he was like, hey Maximilian, I know you're super happy, love the new, awesome, congratulations with that stuff, really, good stuff. Wanna move to Mexico and work for me? Great. The entire family was like, say no, please. But Maximilian accepted the job anyways and left. Once they arrived in Mexico, she wasn't part of the picture, nor was the family for that matter. She realized Maximilian married her for her wealth and status. Yeah, not love after all. It's not very nice. So she became upset, rightfully so, and quite paranoid. Also rightfully so. She moved on, as a matter of fact. She met another man, had a child with him. I don't want to say spoiled, but as far as princesses go, this was unheard of behavior at the time. Again, I am rooting for this one. She passed in 1927, an old woman, so she wasn't taken out horribly or anything afterwards. She actually had somewhat of a life, which is nice. Now the list starts to get a little dark. Number 8, Cleopatra. Yeah, talk about family problems. We're heading back to ancient history. Talk about family problems. Okay, we're heading back to ancient Egypt for this royal tea. Royal tea. You see it. When Ptolemy VII died back in 51 BCE, naturally the throne was passed on to his son, Ptolemy the 8th. There we go. And Cleopatra the 7th. Now both children were assigned to said throne, Cleopatra being 18 and her brother only being 10 years old. So Cleopatra became the main bread and butter here. She was pretty much the ruler, and in typical ancient fashion, the two had to get married. Gross. Yeah, you gotta keep it in the family, yet again. A couple years passed, and with Cleopatra trying to run the show, little brother wasn't having it. Or rather, little husband and co-ruler wasn't having it. Eventually, Cleopatra was pushed out of Alexandria. Her greed for power over her little brothers, equally a co-ruler, had her driven out ultimately. But don't fret, once she met Julius Caesar, the help of the Roman army allowed for her return to Egypt, but this time with more power. Caesar then reinstated Cleopatra as queen. Hashtag she's back.
Number 7, Mary Queen of Scots. I told you I was gonna bring her up. A name you will recognize as I've already mentioned her before, but in terms of who the villain in that story is, it depends on which side you're telling the story on. Mary's story is full of tragedy, romance, betrayal, loss, and heartbreak. Unlike Lizzie, Mary was a dedicated Catholic and spent the entirety of her reign trying to gather the Catholics against Elizabeth. She had a series of marriages and relationships that led to tragedy every which way she went. Her first husband, the Dauphin of France, died shortly after their marriage. Her second husband she loved until he became a drunkard, and then she just started running things. But he was mysteriously unalived while she was 6 months pregnant. He was inside a building that exploded, but his body landed outside and it turned out he was strangled, so what happened there? She would later give birth to 2 stillborn sons, but she would have sons later on. She would have a son who would inherit the throne after Elizabeth's death, but it was due to Mary's plotting and scheming that eventually ended her in death. So she did actually plot to kill Elizabeth. So that's a pretty unholy deed, I would say. Number 6. Princess Olga of Kiev. Okay, wow, this woman. One saint you definitely don't want to mess with. Despite being a saint, Princess Olga of Kiev was actually pretty sinful. She was one of the most vicious and vengeful rulers in the history of Kievan Rus, which would later become Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. Olga took center stage after her husband died and made sure she would never be forgotten. Her husband died in a very gruesome way by the enemies that we're going to talk about in a second. When the people who viciously unalived her husband tried to persuade her to marry their leader, they sent 20 men. Olga told them to wait in their boats, had her men dig a ditch in the meantime, and the next morning buried the men alive. She then lied and told the king she would accept his offer if he sent his best company to retrieve her. He didn't know about all that stuff yet. When they got there, she locked them in a bathhouse and torched it. But it didn't stop there. Olga didn't stop there, that's not her style. She would later host a steak dinner with her enemies in which they were staked. Very Vlad the Impaler, I know. Then she set whole villages on fire by attaching sulfur to pigeons, and then it was just crazy. Damn, like hell has no fury like a woman scorned, let me tell you. Number 5. Queen Isabella I. The Spanish Inquisition, pretty high up there as far as terrifying points in history go. If you weren't willing to convert to Catholicism, you were tormented, interrogated, and burned at the stake. Who was behind this awful time in history? This lady, Queen Isabella I. Technically, as she was fighting for a holy order for the Catholic Church, this can be seen as holy, but was it? Burning people at the stake because they didn't share this belief? Not cool, Isabel. She created a secular government through her reign which allowed for the monarchy to have more power. Being a pious Catholic, she made Catholicism the official religion and created a tribunal to make this happen. Secret service or a secret police that spread fear wherever they went. Her direct influence caused the Jewish population to falter for a really long time after. Number 4. Fridegund of Soissons. Okay, I maybe said that wrong, so I apologize. Kind of impressed with her rise to power. She went from slave attendant to queen. How do you bridge that gap? No idea. Boy was she ferocious. Assassination and manipulation were her main political tools. Fridegund was among a small number of enslaved women in the Merovingian household that became a queen. Merovingian was the OG Central Europe before everything got split up. She survived political dangers and retained her husband's loyalty and could persuade monks and priests to jump onto her plots with ease. She encouraged her husband, the king, to set aside his first wife and then even take the life of his second. But his second wife, Galswinda, had a sister named Brunhild who became the mortal enemy of Fridegund. She had good reason to be. Fridegund continued to do everything she could to secure her position, one assassination after the next. She was a pretty stormy lady.
Number 2. Elizabeth Bathory. The Hungarian noblewoman was everything but noble, honestly. This was a rough go. Back in the late 16th century and even in the early 17th century, Elizabeth would meet these young peasants and then ask them to come work at her castle. She promised them a high-paying job as a servant. Sounds bad, but really that's a way better deal than being broke outside of the castle, so many times, if not all these times, these poor people would say yes, they would agree, and they would come back to the castle. When they arrived to the castle, she would harm them, she would trap them, just bad stuff. Then finally, once she was bored or ready for the next house guest, she would finish them off brutally. The number of fatalities here apparently was somewhere around 80 peasants, but historically that number has got up to around 600 in some accounts. So 800 to 600 people. That's really bad. Come 1611, things changed. She was locked up in her own castle with barely any sunlight. Nice. She was feeling the weight of her own actions, finally, hopefully, right? But then 4 years later in 1614, she sadly passed away. Next to Vlad the Impaler, she's been a large inspiration behind Bram Stoker's Dracula. Yeah, just saying that alone, I should have led with that, really. Number 1. Queen Ranavalona. The last queen of Madagascar, Queen Ranavalona. One of the worst historically. She had quite the temper. She was born in 1788. She ruled over the kingdom for 33 years in total. That's a long time. She's remembered as cruel, violent, and would often choose violence first in order to preserve independence over the island. She's known as the most ruthless queen in history, and after the death of her husband she just went insane. She went mad with said power. In the late 1700s, King Adrian originally brought peace to the land, but naturally there were traditionalists who opposed him. This isn't new historically. The king's uncle at one point tried to take him out, but a local warned the king beforehand. Nice. We love that, nice hot tip. The king repaid said local by adopting his daughter, one Ranavalona, to marry his son, Prince Radama. Sounds like a good idea? Not really, this is like Game of Thrones again. When the prince was alive, they didn't get along, and come 1810, the king passed away, giving Ranavalona the promotion of a lifetime. Rumor has it Irene of Athens poisoned him. Just a rumor, but it's fitting as to what follows. Irene of Athens kept away the advances of the French and the British by leaving bodies of those who tried to attack prior just out on display. Yeah, just sitting there on the beach. Imagine the smell. That's a horrible sight. In 1845, Queen Irene of Athens ordered 50,000 subjects to build roads across the jungle for 4 months. This massive buffalo hunt. Whatever, but well, 10,000 of those poor souls died of starvation and exhaustion, and not one buffalo was brought back. It was all just a sham. Horrible, right? Yep, that's history. Kicking off the list at number 10, Princess Urraca. Princess Urraca of Zamora. This first one, honestly, it feels like a Game of Thrones episode. When King Ferdinand I, aka Ferdinand the Great, aka El Magno, finally met his fate back in 1065, he split his kingdom up into 5 parts, equally for all of his 5 children. This was modern day Spain, so it was quite a bit of land to give out. The eldest son, Sancho, he was pretty greedy. He wanted more land than he was left with. Typical Lannister. The guy had the biggest part of Castile as well, and it still wasn't enough. What a brat. Now luckily, his sister, Princess Urraca, was a badass. She stood up to her brother. She's the Arya Stark of the family. She's like, you know what? Nah, knock it off, pal. How does that sound? The princess sent in some hired help. Yeah, he was disguised as a negotiator, but really this guy was Ezio Auditore. This guy was from Assassin's Creed, the musical. He had a different agenda, you know what I'm saying? And just like that, the brother was no longer an issue. Yeah, how nuts is that? Families can get wild sometimes. Everybody's got that one aunt, no doubt, but this is some next level drama right here. No one does it like early Spain. Number 9, Clara Ward. Back in the late 1800s, since birth, Clara Ward was born into wealth. Her father was Michigan-born Captain Eberbrook Ward, Michigan's first ever millionaire. He had shares in steamships, Great Lakes. She didn't need a royal husband at all, but she wanted one. And she knew as soon as she saw him. The young Prince of Caraman-Chimay, member of the Belgian Chamber of Deputies. Clara Ward would sometimes visit the family mills, you know, make it look good, shake a few hands, laugh at some jokes, see where the fortune comes from, all that jazz. But on this one day, she crossed paths with said prince. And it was love at first sight. He was there for trade, but when he left, he brought back a wife. And the common folk were not having it. Nope, they were not on board. People were freaking out. A royal married a rich American girl? That's like 4 red flags right there. She was the talk of every town at this point. It didn't help that Clara was happy either. Yeah, how dare she? Clara loved to show off her newfound wealth, and some loved her and stood by her image, others not so much. The marriage only lasted 6 years. Clara eloped with a Hungarian musician, and after her divorce, she modeled for a living. Now, I know I put spoiled in the title, but I'm really on board for this one. This is awesome. Princes, musicians, modeling, this is the dream, no? Number 8, Princess Colonus. Most of the time, these marriages are chosen. Women are forced to marry some gross, fat old dude, and while he's cheating and eating lobster and being nasty, the wife has to stay, have kids, raise said kids, and be dutiful. It's a horrible deal. So for the Spartan princess from the 3rd century, she too was forced to marry Cleonymus, this older, horrible man. He was so horrible, he wasn't even allowed to have his father's throne at this point. They were like, maybe we shouldn't do this. That's how bad he was. So Colonus thought, this guy sucks, the system sucks, I'm gonna go talk to the much more pleasant Architatus, son of King Arius I. So around 272 BC, both of these warriors, now both her lovers, they went to war. Colonus was ready to leave it all behind if her husband won. This really was the final standoff, and he could not win. He was horrible. Luckily, her husband did not succeed, but we also have a Princess Colonus to thank. Imagine she stayed in this horrible relationship and just didn't say anything or didn't fight back. It would have been bad for everybody involved, not just her or her family. Number 7, Isabella of France. If you ever wondered how King Edward II passed away, well, here you go. I got your back. Back in the early 1300s, Isabella of France was in a relationship with King Edward II of England. They didn't see eye to eye on politics, which is, okay, that's fair, more than fair. And Edward's company surely didn't help, all of his guys, his advice, you know? One of his advisors tried to push Isabella out of the king's circle. This was 1318. Isabella wasn't on board here, and after being ignored for pretty much 2 years, she just left. She was like, forget this, you and all your boys club, I'm just leaving. She left for France. Edward refused to return King Charles IV's land, so Charles and now Isabella, both siblings, don't forget, they both invaded England and took out the king. Wow, that's like the finale of a Game of Thrones season. Their son was then named the ruler of England. Yeah, don't mess with Isabella of France, she'll leave. and then she'll come back. Number 6. Empress Julia Agrippina. Another ancient Roman classic. Yeah, we've mentioned Nero on this channel before, more than once of course. He's a bit of an oddball. But his mother, Empress Julia Agrippina, she was up to no good long before Nero's days. She fully believed that the empire belonged to her, so she manipulated her uncle Claudius so he would change the Roman laws surrounding family marriage. Yeah, odd. It's always about this, huh? Gross. A little spoiled, I'd say. Even to this day, Claudius's death is a mysterious one. Many believe this empress took her own uncle out. I'm not gonna lie, I'd believe it at this point. Her and Nero ruled Rome from 49 to 54 CE, but Nero, spoiler alert, pushed her out of power. Even Nero was like, yeah, you're up to something here, miss. Get out of here. I'm all set. Number 5. Irene of Athens. She once ruled from 797 CE to 802 CE. These are quite old, but we're still talking about family issues, always. She co-ruled with her son for a couple of years. That seems to be the common theme always. Her son being Emperor Constantine VI. It's a Greek tragedy what happened here, really. See, Irene's main goal was to gain control over the Byzantine Empire. The only way to do so, Irene figured, was to lead a conspiracy. Yeah, she got political allies on board, spread some rumors, and eventually it worked. Constantine was finally kicked out and blinded, believe it or not. Yeah, it was just brutal, brutal stuff. All because of his mother's orders and rumors. Number 4. Joan of Kent. Heading over to the 14th century England, Joan of Kent, also known as the most beautiful woman in all of England at the time. Not a bad title at all. She was also known to be quite loving. She was nice. She earned the nickname the Fair Maid of Kent. That's a nice nickname. Historical nicknames, they can be hit or miss. That's good. The son of King Edward III even fell in love with her at this time. Things are going well. The pair got married finally in 1361, and folks were just not having it. Joan at the time was 31 years old. She was already a mother to 4 children, and Joan was previously married, even before this whole royal engagement. So everybody was of course up in arms about the entire ordeal. Yeah, Joan was 12 years old the first marriage. She married a knight named Tom Holland. And when Tom went to war, the son of the Earl of Salisbury came in to ask for her hand in marriage. That's how nice she was. Everybody wanted her. There's no way to know if Tom Holland would return, so she assumed that he had died in battle. So she said yes, and then Thomas came back from said battle. And yeah, he was still alive. And now he was unhappy. And a legal battle soon followed that one. In the end, Thomas won that battle and him and Joan raised the 4 children. But after he passed, she then became the first ever Princess of Wales. And again, people weren't happy about it because she had a history. Number 3. Ice Princess. Anna Ivanova, the Empress of Russia from 1730 to 1740. Okay, where to begin with this one? It's kind of chilly. First of all, Russia is a pretty cold place. This is coming from a Canadian. This next story sounds absolutely awful. In celebration of their victory over the Ottoman Empire, Anna Ivanova gave the order to build an ice house. An ice palace, rather. Of course, it's a palace, a big glorious. The best of the best for a princess, right? Always. 20 meters by 50 meters. Every corner was carefully crafted. Some guy was just like licking the corners to make sure they weren't sharp. There were intricate decorations all over, like ice trees, ice birds, yeah, you get it, a lot of ice. There was an ice thing. Everything was made out of ice. How magical is that? Hope you brought your non-slips. Princess Ivanova arranged this to celebrate the marriage of one of her maids and a prince. These two didn't know each other prior. They were then forced to marry each other in a freezing cold palace, and then they had to ride an elephant. Again, in a freezing cold palace. And all the guests were forced to attend the wedding dressed up like clowns. Yeah, this is pretty awful. Nothing like the film Frozen at all. Way different of a princess. Different Anna. Number 2, Heart of Glass. Alexandria of Bavaria, the 23-year-old Bavarian princess who believed she was made out of glass. Isn't that fun? Isn't that fun to deal with? Imagine that. Alexandria was also quite the scholar at the time. The young 19th century princess was into reading and literature, all that good stuff. But she also believed that when she was younger, she had swallowed a tiny glass piano. So if she were to move around too quickly or bump into anything, she was afraid her inner piano would shatter into pieces. Do I think this is a princess being spoiled? No, not at all. This was probably an undiagnosed psychological condition. But at the time, everybody was like, oh, she's just fragile, she's noble, she's a noble glass lady. No, she literally thought she was made out of glass. This is a problem. The glass delusion was common in the Middle Ages, but again, so were barbershop dentist surgeons, so, you know. And finally, number 1, Isabella of Spain. Going back to the 15th century to Queen Isabella of Spain, we're getting pretty nasty for this number 1. For queens to brag about their wealth, status, their man, you name it, is normal. But to brag that you've only bathed twice ever in your entire life, That's an odd flex. Okay. Well, way back in 537 AD, Rome had 11 aqueducts that ran to over 1,000 public fountains and over 900 bathhouses. It was quite important, but then when invading Goths came in and, cut them off, the Catholic Church had no idea how to fix the problem. So instead, they just started telling everybody that bathing was a sin only practiced by pagans.
Number 9. Catherine the Great. So Catherine the Great was called the Great for a reason. She was a pretty epic woman by most accounts. She even had one of the first vaccines, which is pretty crazy. Though she wasn't actually born in Russia or even Russian at all, Catherine was not content to go down in history quietly. She considered herself an enlightened ruler, and history tends to agree, with aims of prioritizing education for the people. She had many lovers, and there is enough evidence to suggest that the son she had was illegitimate. Peter III of Russia was hardly the man Catherine intended on marrying, and later planned a coup against him which resulted in her position of power. However, the coup did turn bloody when on July 17th, Peter died under mysterious circumstances. There isn't proof that she was directly involved or even knew about it, but it cast a dark shadow over her reign for the rest of the time. Number 8. Grace O Malley. We've got enough traditional royalty on this list that we definitely need to spice it up. Enter Grace O Malley, the Pirate Queen of Ireland. Pirate Queen! What a title. Definitely considered unholy behavior, Grace abandoned the traditions of women of the time and fled to the sea. There, she took on the waves and perils of Davy Jones' locker with a legendary ferocity. She was born into the clan O'Malley around 1530, around the time of Henry VIII's rule over England and Ireland. Clan O'Malley was a notorious seafaring clan and ruled the southern shore of Clew Bay, Achilleland, and most of the barony of Murrisk for over 300 years. Grace was really well educated and could even converse fully in Latin, Spanish, Scottish, Gaelic, and French. She was not one to be refused, and after spending years fighting the British, she finally met Queen Bess, and not only did she speak Latin to her, but she refused to bow as she was considered a queen herself by that point.
Number 7. Princess Margaret. This next princess partied with rock stars during the 60s. Yeah, might ring a bell. The queen's younger sister was known as the Rebel Princess, like in Star Wars, I guess. She was the talk of the town for years. Scandal central, my friends. God forbid a royal had a good time with cool people in the 60s. She passed away in 2002, but we're still talking about her love life. For example, Pablo Picasso moved to California in 1955, and he said there's only one possible bride for him, the 24-year-old Princess Margaret. Also, yeah, Pablo Picasso is way more recent than all of you thought, guaranteed. She always had the spotlight. Her wedding was the first ever royal wedding to be aired on TV. That was May 6, 1960. And in 1968, word had spread that the princess had an affair with a nightclub pianist, Robin Douglas Home. And then come 1973, paparazzi got photos, proof of Margaret hooking up with a landscape gardener on her private island. Yeah, how dare she do things on a private island? Where did they even get these photos? Like through bushes? These guys are crazy. And one of the most unusual facts surrounding Princess Margaret was that she was cremated. Yeah, she had chosen to break tradition so that her ashes could be shared in the same tomb as her father. Yeah, all these acts historically are unusual. They're unheard of, to party that often, publicly, to break vows, and then even after death still break tradition. To that I say kudos. The woman lived her life the way she wanted to. This is a life lesson, my friends. Unusual acts when it comes to royalty, yeah, we'll talk about that and have a good time, but it's also fair to mention that Princess Margaret also supported more than 80 charity organizations in her lifetime. Yeah, we don't talk about that one though. Number 6. Queen Victoria. If I'm eating, don't acknowledge me as a human being. I sound like an animal when I eat. When I'm really diving in, like holidays, I'm not a human, I'm an eating machine. I don't waste any time, I love food, and if you're a queen and you can eat fast, well, everybody else has to eat at the same pace as you. How lovely is that? This began back in Queen Victoria's time. The queen loved to feast and she didn't waste any time at all. The way the royal family works is that when the queen is done,
you're done.
Doesn't matter where you are in your meal, if she just puts her cutlery down, everything is going, and then the next course will come in. You can even have one bite, you could be like, okay, here we go. And then it's gone, just like that. All because she could eat a lot of food in a short amount of time. Hurry up, slowpoke. Also, once the queen gave a toast, you couldn't even speak at that point. Yeah, just right down to business, just eating food, that's it. This food would be taken away at lightning speed, so you better get what you wanted fast. You'd only have like 2 minutes, really. I would just put food in my pockets, like it's all you can eat sushi. That's what I'll do. I'll never leave sushi behind, no matter how full I am. Never. That's one rule I'll never break. I'll pocket the rest, always. I'll bring a coat with a lot of pockets. Save a few California rolls for the bus ride home, in case I get a second wind. Number 5, till death do us part. Funerals are pretty expensive, especially a royal one at that. It takes a lot of power to dig and then carry around these massive caskets, which back in the day was even more exhausting because, we didn't have protein shakes or any food really. Joanne of Castile was born in 1479. Her marriage to the Duke of Austria was arranged, but she was very much in love during this time. When her husband finally met his fate in 1506 due to typhoid fever, Joanna would have his tomb unearthed over and over again and then reopened over and over because she wanted to make sure that he was still in there, that he was still dead. Now of course, on one hand, yeah, I feel bad for the queen here. She was clearly not coping with his death very well, but like this, what a privilege, what a gross privilege this is. To have his tomb open and closed over and over again, she would make people carry around his casket everywhere she went. Sometimes she'd even keep it under her bed. That's creepy. See, ashes I could understand. That's like a one-man job to carry those around. A little less odd, but a 1,000-pound royal coffin? I also feel bad for the guards who had to cope with his death as well. They had to carry everything. They must have had one really jacked arm after that entire process. Number 4, a duel. A duel with a princess? What is this, Star Wars? What is this list? Hungarian Princess Pauline von Metternich was married to Prince Clemens. She was born in 1836, and she had to marry her uncle when she was only 20. So, yeah, surprise, surprise, she was a little unhappy. Weird, right? Who would have guessed? So since the marriage began, her husband was involved in numerous affairs. He liked going after actresses or singers, whoever. He barely paid any attention to her at all. That is until, she started to have a little fun in life. Yeah, then he's like, oh, how dare she? Yeah, once she got over this gross prince, she had a great time. She drank, she smoked, she defied convention, all things you shouldn't do, but most notably, her duel in the summer of 1892. Yeah, she challenged another royal, a countess, to a duel, in nothing but a corset. To this day, it's not yet determined who won this duel, but a princess dueling in the dark after some drinks? This is epic, this is wild. Imagine if this was a Disney princess instead of Sleeping Beauty. Are you kidding me? Parents would be like, okay, go off, queen. I'm on board. Don't look.
Number 3, Bathory. Okay. Alright, technically not a queen, I get it, but she might as well have been with the power that she had. So fight me. She's remembered as the most evil woman in the world in history, I think. I don't know. That's my opinion. Bathory was the stuff of nightmares. Elizabeth Bathory was born on August 7th, 1560 into a prominent Hungarian noble family, making her practically untouchable. She married a very famous war hero who is suspected of gifting Bloody Lizzie with the skills she used to kill. After she died, Bathory became obsessed with immortality. Supposedly when one of her servants accidentally spilt blood on her, and her skin appeared younger after. Bathory then began her mission of horror, luring over 650 young virgin women to her palace and brutally taking their lives. She was even bold enough to lure daughters of nobility. Before draining them of their blood, she would make them suffer in ways you don't even want to imagine before bathing in the blood itself. When she was finally caught, 3 of her servants were executed, but she was simply locked away in her tower for the rest of her days on house arrest. Ugh. Number 2, Catherine de' Medici, also known as the Serpent Queen. History colors her story as the tale of the evil queen. On one hand, she is remembered for being one of the most powerful French queens in history, and then on the other, she was blamed for the many atrocities that took place during her reign. Her regency was marked by the French wars of religion and the many games Catherine played within them. The Catholics and the Protestants, as previously mentioned, were at war, and she spent a lot of time trying to find peace. Kind of. But she was a passionate Catholic and is believed to have tried to remove a Protestant general from her son's side. When he survived the attack, she lied and convinced her son that the Protestants were responsible, so she scapegoated them. So he authorized taking the lives of their leaders. Enter St. Bartholomew's Massacre. Catherine implicated the general, which resulted in him being the first to be beaten and then tossed out of his own bedroom window. An estimated 3,000 French Protestants were taken out in Paris, but the total countrywide was around 70,000. And last but not least, Bloody Mary, actually known as Queen Mary I of England, so no, I'm not talking about the girl you say in the mirror 3 times so that she appears and you're like, wow, I'm haunted forever. Queen Mary became known as Bloody Mary due to her vicious tirade against Protestants in England during her reign. She even imprisoned her own sister, Elizabeth, who we mentioned at the beginning of this list, due to suspicions of treason. This was unfounded. She bore her father Henry VIII ill will after the stuff he pulled with the church, and after having delegitimate legitimized her as his heir for a time. After Mary took the throne and married the Catholic King of Spain, she began carrying out her plan for England to become Catholic once again. In 1555, she revived England's heresy laws and began burning offenders at the stake, starting with her father's longtime advisor, Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury. She burned over 300 convicted heretics, most of them being common citizens, and dozens more died in prison, hence giving her the name of Bloody Mary.